Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode on Claude Code. As this is the big one, Anthropic has finally released Claude Sonnet 4.5, but not only that, Anthropic have also released a new version of Claude Code 2.0, as well as updated their VS Code extension in order to compete with the Codex IDE. Now, I'm sure you've seen all of these different graphs and benchmarks about how good Claude Sonnet is, and I'm not going to bore you with that because I think that what really matters is how it performs when you're actually trying to build something real. And so in today's video, I will be putting Claude through its paces, building a complete app from a single PRD. Now, it will not only have the front end, but it will have a backend integrated with Supabase as well. And along the way, I will be covering all of the major updates as part of this new release. But not only that, I will make sure to be using the full suite of Claude Code functions. This includes making use of sub-agents in a multi-agent architecture where you actually run several of these agents in parallel, as well as using custom slash commands for both designing and implementing the application. In my last video, I actually took the whole ecosystem of Codex components to create something called the Codexometer, which is an open AI-powered sentiment analysis tracker over Reddit. So for today, what we'll be doing is that we'll be building a competitor product for that, which is the Claudometer. And to make things fair, I'll be using the exact same PRD, just modifying Codex to Claude so that we can see and do a fair comparison between the both of them. All right, so I hope you're excited to see how this turns out. But before I dive right in, if you're interested in getting hold of the resources for today's tutorial, you'll definitely want to check out my AI-oriented Insiders Club. This is where I upload lesson plans and code related to all of my videos, and subscribers also benefit from getting access to some early material and midweek updates. And if you want to take this a step further, you might want to check out my builder packs, which I have for both Claude Code as well as Codex. This is a complete toolkit to help you get up and running and level up your workflows in both Claude and Codex. So links to all of these are in the description below. And without further ado, let's get started with today's tutorial. Okay, so let's get going with just typing in Claude. And what I'm going to do is just double check the version I'm on. So this is the version that I'll be using right now. And so let's actually just jump right in, and I'm going to do dangerously steep emissions as I always do, so that I don't get inundated by the different permissions and approvals that we might need. So Claude Code now has a completely revamped interface. They are actually pushing out this nice little mascot over here, which is actually quite nice to see. And personally, of all the different CLIs between Gemini, Codex, and Claude Code, I still think that the overall interface of the terminal that we get with Claude Code is the best. So this is the first thing that you see. A couple of new changes as well. If you go into extensions and you look for the Claude Code extension, they've also updated this as well. And the good thing about this is that they unify the extension version with the same version number that you see in Claude Code as well. So that's actually quite useful. The biggest change with the extension is the fact that last time when you clicked on this, it would just start a new terminal, much like what you see at the bottom. But this time, what you get is something a little bit more like Cursor or the Codex IDE. So you actually have this dedicated window over here, and it looks very different from that terminal that you would get if you just ran Claude directly. It gives you a couple of nice things over here, so you can switch between plan mode, ask for edits, and edit automatically. But the main thing that you get out of this interface that you have up here is that you can see your past conversations. And you get the usual things where you can tag the files that you have, all the folders. You can also run your slash commands as well, which is really good. All right, so we will do a couple of these things using the IDE version over here. But before we do, what we're going to do is just quickly jump into the terminal. So a couple of things that you could already do before, which is context, which allows you to see how much of your context is actually used up by various things like the system prompt, the MCP tooling, and all of your custom agents. So you can see that over here. Okay, and I'm just going to go to usage. All right, so as you can see, if you actually have any issues with running usage, you might actually I found that I needed to log out and log back in again. But the good thing about this usage, as you can see over here, is that it actually shows you your usage for the current session. So your current 5-hour block, as well as your weekly block. And they've actually separated it out such that you can see the difference between all models and using Opus as well. So in the past, you would be able to use something like CC usage, but those were just estimates, and now you're getting it directly from Anthropic themselves, which is really good. Okay, another few things that you can do, which I'll show along the way, is that you can actually do rewind now to restore the conversation. And you can actually access this similarly by pressing escape twice. It will actually revert your changes as well. Now, one of the things that I don't really like, even though we have this ID within Claude Code right now, I think the difference between it and say something like Codex, which I'm going to show you here, is that first of all, Codex feels really thought out and fully integrated. whereas Claude Code feels a little bit like a wrapper around the Claude Code interface, which is still nice to have, but it doesn't have things like syncing with GitHub, as well as passing things off into the cloud, which, if you actually saw my previous video, actually is a very useful way of offloading your compute into the background so that you can actually use the current instance of Claude Code for something else. And the other thing I really don't like is that we can't dock this to the side, right? Everything else, I think like this, and if I'm not wrong, you can see Copilot here also can be docked to the right. Whereas, unfortunately, Claude Code just never gets over there. It's almost like it's a second editor tab, and this sometimes conflicts with a file that you might have open, right? Because you can technically drag this over here, and then it just gets a little bit messy. So I don't really like how Claude Code has done it. I just wish they'd just do it a little bit like Codex and how Copilot does it, and that'll be a lot better. Okay. All right, so and that's a quick overview of the broad changes, but I think the best way to actually look at the recent changes that have come out from Claude Code is by actually going and building a project. So if you actually saw my last video, for the benefit of those of you who haven't seen this before, in my last video, I actually looked at something called Claudometer, which tracks sentiment for the LLMs across the different Reddit communities, whether it's ChatGPT, Claude, and Gemini. And so I actually created one in my last video where I actually used Codex in my last video to try to create a Codexometer, which actually tracked the sentiment specifically on Codex across OpenAI related subreddits. So I decided that like comparison would be very useful. So we'll be building our very own Claudometer that will focus specifically on Claude. So I just literally took the PRD from the last video where we built the Codexometer and just replaced everything with Claude Code and specified these 3 subreddits, so Claude AI, Claude Code, and Anthropic, as the ones that we're going to pass. So this should give us a fairly good benchmark of how Claude Sonnet 4.5 actually compares to the OpenAI GPT-5 models as well. Okay, all right, so that's what we'll be doing today. Okay, another few more things, like you can switch between the model now, and they've actually changed this now. Previously, you could actually do this thing called Opus to plan and Sonnet to implement, which a lot of people really liked. But now they've actually gotten rid of it. It's basically just use Sonnet 4.5 as your default and only use 4.1 if you're doing some really complex tasks. And there's a lot of complaints out there, I think, from various people saying that they've been running out of their quota pretty quickly. And I think you can see that Anthropic is really driving people to have just one model for most of the tasks, regardless of whether it's like planning mode or execution mode, and use Opus only when you are like dealing with a very gnarly problem. I'm not really sure what to think about that, but I think it's worthwhile pointing out. So what we'll be doing is that we will just use 4.5 today, because the last one that we did, we used actually Codex. We actually used GPT-5 Codex to do the Codexometer version. So I think it's only fair that we use 4.5 for today's Claudometer implementation. I actually realized I don't actually have my status line set up. So just a very quick sidetrack to get a nice status line showing below. So what you can actually do is do npx Chong-U cc-statusline at latest and then do init. And what this will do is it will launch a status line generator. You can actually just pick every single thing that you have here. Yes to emojis. I'll just turn on debug logging and I would like to install it to this project. All right, so it gives you a nice looking status line over here. And the way that I will do this, so that you can see it, is that if I now do Claude and I do dangerously skip permissions, you will see that you have a nice looking status line below. It shows you which model you're using, the version of Claude Code that you're using, as well as the output style and contact remaining and anything related and the usage. So these should start updating. These should start updating as we go along. And hopefully I didn't introduce a bug, because I actually haven't updated this in a while. Okay, all right, so let's get going. All right, so a very quick overview. I'm not going to go into too much detail over here, but a very quick overview is that I have a bunch of sub-agents that I define. And what we're going to do is that we're going to separate it out into 2 phases. So we're going to do a design phase first, and then followed by an implementation phase. And I actually have a whole video on how I separated it out, as well as how each individual sub-agent was defined. But I'm not going to bore you over here, because the whole point here is to get rolling with Sonnet 4.5. A very quick overview is that I will be using 2 custom commands. One of it is called design app, which will kick off an entire process. And this will actually be the first phase of our app development. And you will see that we will launch an orchestrator agent that will coordinate across a bunch of different sub-agents, and in order to produce artifacts that we will then reference when we then move on to the second phase, which is the implementation phase. All right. So that's why we have two slash commands here. Now, while we're talking about recent changes in Claude Code, one of the biggest changes is that your sub-agents can actually now run custom slash commands. So let me just show it to you here. All right. So I actually have this custom slash command called design setup folders, and I'm just going to run it manually myself here. So I'm just going to pass in the PRD. Okay. And so the reason why I'm going to show you this is that I want you to understand a little bit about what the design phase is actually going to be doing. So you can see here, after I run this slash command, you will, and all right, so I've just run this slash command and we'll just give it a moment just to finish. And you can see that my status line has now actually kicked into action. We have context remaining. I've got 91% context, and you can see my usage in dollars all as well as the burn rate. Okay, all right, so now you can see that this slash command has finished. And what actually you will see here is that it has read my PRD documentation, and then it has prepared a output folder in which it has something called a manifest. And this manifest file over here is basically going to outline its understanding based on the PRD document. And then after that, it's going to lay out exactly which sub-agent is going to be involved during the, and then it's going to lay out where each of the individual sub-agents are going to place the outputs of the individual runs. And you will see we'll be using several different sub-agents. Over here, there's a UI designer, a chat CN expert, system architect, a Next.js expert, and a Redis API expert as well. And in fact, what you will see here today, all right, we have seven, all right, and then this manifest file is the key thing, because if you actually see my other videos and what other experts actually specify to do, is that it's always better to get your sub-agents to kind of, if you have multiple sub-agents, each specialized in something, rather than getting them to implement it straight away, it's always better for them to do a planning phase and then put the outputs of their planning phase into folders. And then subsequently, when you've got all of that, only then you go on to implement it. All right. And there's several reasons why you want to do that. Number one, you can actually safely parallelize the sub-agents, because this output structure that you will see over here will mean that they don't overwrite each other's code. They're all writing their outputs and their understanding in two individual folders. The other reason that you want to do it, besides parallelization, is that you actually maximize the context of each of these individual sub-agents, because each time you run a sub-agent, you are actually getting the blank slate, the full context minus whatever system prompt of Claude that you might have. And then because they're writing all the outputs into files, later on when you run your main agent, you're actually going to be able to, in some ways, maximize the full context window rather than trying to squeeze everything into one. Okay? All right, that's enough theory. I think it's time for us to get going. But all right, so anyway, you saw me run this. Okay, anyway, the reason why I was showing you this, me running this slash command directly to create this output folder and a manifest, is that in the past, I actually had to squash all of this information of how to organize the sub-agents, output folders into the prompt of the agent itself. All right, so if you actually look at it, but however, this time, there's a new change in Claude Code that allows you to actually run slash commands as tools. And once you are able to run something as a tool, this means that your sub-agent is going to be able to run it as well. So if you actually dive into here, you can actually see I actually have an explicit instruction here, which basically says use slash command to invoke the exact same slash command that I did before. And this is really important and really useful, because it means that you're now able to abstract out what this design. All right, if you jump into output folders, like you can see, I actually had this fairly long set of instructions over here about how I wanted to organize, how I actually wanted to organize how I take in the arguments, and then how I want to organize the sub-agents. And this is stuff that kind of like bloats up the orchestrator's context previously. But this time, instead of putting all of this in here, it just says use the slash command. So this is a very useful change. It didn't come in version 2.0. And to be precise, this actually came just before the Claude Code 2.0 release came out, but it's still really useful to point out. And by using this pattern, and I think a lot of people have underestimated it, because now that sub-agents can run slash commands, you can then, rather than bloating the context of your sub-agent, you can actually just tell it different commands that it needs to run. So I think there's enough theory of the things and the different changes, but I think what you want to see is how this performs using all of these recent changes, as well as the sub-agent structures that I've been using. All right, so without further ado, I think let's get started. So let's just give this a shot to see how it feels. The other thing about using this is that you don't get the nice status lines that you see below, but that's all right. Let's actually see how this might work. So let's just do the design phase first. I think the thing that I don't really like about this is that you can see here, I want to do dev design app, and I know that I should be passing in some arguments, as you can see over here, right? So if you actually look over here, you see when I do dev design app, I actually can pass in the PRD file. But then when I do it over here in the extension, whether I press space or tab or enter, it actually just submits it, and that's not what I want. I must say that the extension app, as good as it looks and stuff like that, doesn't really suit my workflow, so I'm not going to use it this time. I'm not going to use it for this run, but for now, it just doesn't work for the kind of workflows that I use. So I'm going to close this, and then I'm just going to do that design app, and I'm just going to pass in the file to PRD. Okay, let's just kick this off, and off it goes. So remember, during this phase, what you will see is that the orchestrator would kick off, and then it will then coordinate between all of the different sub-agents. But before that, it will create and prepare an output folder. So before it does that, I'm actually going to make sure that I delete that. All right, and so a couple of new things within Claude Code is that I think if you press question mark, you can see they've actually rejigged a little bit of which command, which hotkeys actually does what. And so it's actually going to be Control O now to actually see. So they've actually changed a bunch of the hotkeys to be able to expand and see what the different tools are doing. And I think you can do Control Key now. All right, so if you go Control O, you can actually see the orchestrators expanded. All right, so you can see that this is the context of the orchestrator that's being passed in. And then, all right, this is the context of the orchestrator that's been passed in. Okay, and then, as you can see, it actually called the custom slash command, and that's the reason why it's actually that's managed to initialize the output folder here with the manifest. Okay, so that's working correctly. And like I said, it's actually a really powerful pattern to be able to have your sub agents now be able to run slash commands as well. And now to-dos are hidden. You have to do Control T to actually expand out the to-dos, which is really nice because I think there's a period of time where they actually got rid of the to-dos, whether intentionally or not. And so this is really good. For those of you, some of you may already be familiar with this if you've seen my previous videos, but I'm going to point it out. So the way that it works is that phase one, the orchestrator is going to set up all of the output folders. And then in the second phase, the UI designer is going to kick in and start looking at how to mock up how this app is going to look. And the way that it does so, which I'm going to do Control O to expand, you will see that you will actually output the design specification into this folder that you see over here. Now, the great thing about this design specification that you will see slowly that over here, these things will start to get populated. In fact, you can actually see that the design specification is already here. And in my previous videos, I actually had multiple different files, but I've actually been experimenting and updating them to just output a single file so that is a lot cleaner because they don't tend to. Let's actually take a look at the wireframes over here, and this is how it's going to look like. All right, so it's going to be a sentiment monitor, and then a bunch of controls, a bunch of toggles for the date ranges, and then some summary metrics, as well as the trend chart. And the way of doing this ASCII art is actually an extremely useful and effective way of getting UI done. So this is something I've been doing consistently across all my projects now, and it works extremely well. And so never underestimate the power of ASCII art. Okay, so let's jump back quickly over here because I wanted to highlight. All right. And one thing to remember, and one thing you might be thinking is, wait a minute, like the orchestrator has run and now the UI designer, what happens and where are the other sub-agents? How come they aren't running yet? This is the reason why, if you actually look at the to-dos here, phase one will kick off. First, and then secondly, the designer will design the wireframe and the user flows. And once this is done, only then will it be able to have a parallel execution across all of the other sub-agents. Because at this point, it has enough information for each one of them to run independently. But prior to the UI designer actually finishing up the mockup and the overall flow, it's probably not the best idea to begin starting doing how the Reddit API is going to look, or how the ChatGPT API is going to look, or how the ShadCN components are going to be, because at this point, you haven't actually understood the overall user flow. And because at this point, you actually haven't finished, because at this point, you haven't actually nailed down the overall flow of the app. And so that's the way I like to do it. And that's the importance of why you need an orchestrator, because it then allows you to determine whether the sub-agents are going to be running sequentially or whether they're going to be able to run in parallel. And I'll highly encourage you to play around with this. In some cases, it's actually great to have multiple parallel agents running. And in some cases, it's actually better to just do it sequentially because there might be a dependency between one subagent and the other. So we're going to let this continue to run, and then we will draw back once we're going to let this continue to run until we reach the second phase where we will do parallel execution. All right, so now you can see that the UI designer has finished its phase. You will see that what it's done is that it has now written its output into this design specification file that you see over here. So over here, you have the wireframes of how it's going to look like. And if you've seen it, right, this is the overall design that it's going to have. It's going to have a header, some controls of which subreddit you're going to be able to filter by, or if you want all of them, and then a date range followed by summary metrics, and then a sentiment line chart, a volume trend with bar charts, and then top keywords with the cloud. And there's some other things that this one covers, but the main goal here that I'm trying to highlight is that it's actually very useful to have a UI designer to lay out how the app is going to look like, followed by the user flow that it's going to have. All right, so the UI designer is now done, and now we've moved on to phase 3. And the great thing about phase 3 is that, as you can see right over here, you actually have 5 subagents running in parallel. There are 2 reasons why they can run in parallel. Number 1, they have all the information that it needs from the previous phase now. So each one of them runs independently from one another, and they already have all the information that it needs from the UI designer before that. So all of them are not going to override each other in anything. The second reason is that remember that they're all going to be writing their outputs into individual folders within this output folder that you have over here. This means that they can safely run in parallel, and you've kind of maximized the context of all of them as well. And I think this is a really powerful pattern where you actually can have your multi-agent architecture using Claude Code shine. This is the best way that I've seen to allow multiple agents to be working, because if you actually have them writing code or overstepping on each other, running in parallel in the same code base, you can end up with conflicting edits. Whereas in this way, you don't have to worry. And it's actually one of the recommended ways is that to always write outputs to file, and then you grab the context when you need it from them later. Okay, so these are going to be running in parallel right now, and we're just going to let it run to completion. And as you will see, the final step is that where the orchestrator will look at everything that's been done and then consolidate everything together in the manifest file. So just mention that if you're interested in getting hold of this multi-agent architecture, which you can then extend using the orchestrator that allows you to coordinate against a swarm of subagents, deciding when to make it sequential or when to make it parallel, you can get hold of this code in the link in the description below in my builder pack. You can get hold of all of this in the link in my Claude Code builder pack. I've made all of this available in my Claude Code builder pack, which is available in the link in the description below. So we're just going to let this run to completion right now, and then we'll draw back once it finishes. All right, so the design phase has been finished. He has finished all 4 phases, including the parallel phase and the final synthesis phase. And you can see a quick summary of the output. It has a design system, so it says it's going to be navy with sentiment colors, using 8 ShadCN components, Next.js app router, an AI for the sentiment analysis, and then it's going to have 5 API routes and a caching strategy and a bunch of testing as well. I actually have an entire video on how to leverage different testing frameworks such as Station, so you want to check it out if you want to. But now that we are here, it actually tells you that the next step is that we go ahead and implement this app based on this output. And one thing that I really like about Sonnet 4.5 is that this next step here, I don't really remember it being so explicit. I don't know whether it's just prompts or whatever, but it seems to be quite good at laying out that this should be the next step that we're taking over here. But before we do that, I just want to run through. So as you can see here, I'm going to expand out all of these different subagents have now given their output and written it down. So you can see the AI integration, how you're going to connect to OpenAI. You can see the Reddit API, how you're going to use OAuth 2, and you can set up a script and how you're going to actually set up this app on Reddit. And then you have your ShadCN expert, which shows you all the different components and the color schemes to match what the UI designer did. You have your test specifications, your system architecture of how everything is going to load based on the Next.js router, and as we already saw earlier, how the overall design is going to look like. Now, and I just wanted to emphasize again, being able to run all these subagents in parallel and then have them write them all onto this output is the strategy to go whenever you're working with subagents. This is a very effective way of using them now you can go ahead and implement it based on the output that you have published here. So you've really maximized the content and minimized the amount of overlapping and overwriting that might have occurred. All right, so what I'm going to do is that I'm going to actually just try to make use of this Claude function over here. So I'm going to say initialize the Next.js 15 yet connecting boilerplate that with app router in a folder called app, so that we have a good starting point. All right, so let's just give this a roll and see what happens. I'm just going to check here. So the nice thing about this interface over here is that it is integrated with Claude Code CLI, so you can actually see the different sessions that you were running. So it's not just confined to what you had in the chat over here. And now it's going to ask for instructions. So it's not, because we didn't run it with dangerously skipped permissions. And I suppose that the best way to actually be doing it is that if you jump into your Claude folder, go into settings, and then add it into your allowed tools, that would be the best way of doing it. Given that this is just a single command, I'm just happy to just let this run over there. Okay, so he actually has done this, and as you can see, that is put it over here. And I'm actually going to see whether you can do. All right, so I'm going to do a git, I'm going to do a commit. All right, so that's done over here. And what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to commit this. So I'm going to do. Right, so I'm just close that. All right, so now that's done. I'm going to do. Okay, I'm just going to jump back into Claude Code right now, and I'm just going to run this step over here because I actually still prefer using the CLI interface when I'm working with Claude Code. So all we have to do now to implement the app is to just run a single command. So implement f and then passing the output folder like the manifest. So here we go. And just a quick look into this output folder. Once again, you can see the manifest here has laid out where each and every one of the subagents have stored their files and what their files are all about. And that's the reason why this manifest is really important, because it helps to organize what all of the individual subagents have done and relate it back to the PRD documentation. So if you actually look over here, it actually ensures that it actually matches the requirements. So everything that has been done should match the requirements that have been laid out in the PRD. Okay, all right, that's the reason why the manifest is so important. And now we're just going to kick this off and let it see if it's going to be able to implement. Just to show you as well, because implement app actually takes in two parameters. So not only does it take in the output folder, which is here's one that you see over here, but the other thing is that we've already initialized the Next.js app, so we can actually go ahead and do that. Okay, so I'm going to now say tweet, boilerplate, Next.js. Two. And in this case, I'm just going to pass an app because that's where our Next.js app has been initialized. All right, so this is going to kick off right now, and we're just going to let this go. And so what this slash command is going to do, as you can see here, is that it's going to analyze all of the design specifications and then make sure that, and you can see right here now, it's actually looking at everything from the manifest file as well as all of the output files from the individual subagents. And this is how it's going to work. Then after that, it's going to implement the individual components, including the Reddit API to scrape the data, the OpenAI for performing the sentiment analysis. Then subsequently, it's going to build the UI components and then integrate everything into the user workflow before testing it and getting it ready to go. So we're going to just leave this to run, and then we'll come back at the end. But I hope that this shows you the flow of using a design phase followed by an implementation phase and how the overall framework works. And I know this is a pattern that I've done before, but I really wanted to showcase what I would consider as best practice, especially when you're building an MVP, especially when you have a PRD, and how you want to make use of your subagents. And like I said, you can see here we're using Sonnet 4.5 because this is what this video is going to be all about. So we'll come back at the end once it's finished with all of the implementation. All right, folks, we are back. So quick summary of what it's been able to do is that it's implemented the Claude Code sentiment monitor, and you can see it's done the database layer using Prisma and Postgres. And then it has a Reddit service, sentiment service, and an aggregation service. I guess one of it is to scrape, the other one is to analyze, and the other one is to combine all of it so that you can store it. There's a bunch of different routes. And then it talks about the dashboard UI and how the design systems were done. I think what we are going to do now is that we're just going to give this all right. So it's actually created env.example file as well. All right. And all right. So it's got an env.example file here. So you can see I just have put in the database URL, a bunch of Reddit credentials, and then an OpenAI key, which I'll do very shortly. And then I guess we should be in a position to get this going. All right. So let's actually just give this a roll right now. So what I'm going to do is just very quickly now just try to see if we can even run it. So we can run that. And as you can see, cool. All right. So this is just the overall how it looks like without it being hooked up to data just yet. So you're going to be able to switch between the different dates and then the different subreddits, and then we get the sentiment trend and the discussion volume, as well as the top keywords. All right. I guess it's using mock data for now. And so what we're going to do is that we can see whether we can like tie everything up and then launch and deploy it. Okay. All right. I'm going to go ahead and just set all of this up very quickly. So I'm going to actually say I have set up the step 1 and 2. Run 3 for me. I'll be honest with you, I actually have not used Prisma. I generally use SlashCommand when it comes to migrations. I should have been using the direct connection. I should have been using the pooler. So I think this time it should work. And yes, this time it does. Given that this is having issues, I'm going to say, can we change tact and just use direct Supabase SQL queries to specify them from the SQL column, and I will run that. So I'm just going to copy and paste these SQL files and go into the table editor, into the SQL editor, and I'm just going to run this. I'm going to rename this one to create tables, and I'm going to run this. Great. And then I think that's all we really need to get that done, rather than messing around with Prisma files, especially since this is like a demo, an initial version. So we're not going to really worry about the migrations right now. And we not do the Prisma generate plus use another square. All right, so this is a really good example where it did something which I didn't want it to do. So I'm just going to press escape twice. And then if I go back here, I think it will actually revert the changes that it made to this Prisma.sql file. All right, so you can see here, you can restore code and conversation. You can just say restore conversation or restore code, but let's actually go to restore code and conversation. So that's better. All right, and so let's actually just try to run it. Okay, so I'm just say run this. All right, so that's exactly what it needs to do. And let's hope that works. Yeah, I was trying to see if I could get away with not just running Prisma at all, but then I realized that given that the TypeScript definitions are written, it was probably best to utilize this. And given that the initial migration is run, it seems to be working fine. So it says now I can run the dev server. One thing I like to do is that I just say run npm run in the background. So then it does it. And then run the curl, but just do a small number of days so we can test 3 days. All right, and see if that works. And so you can see if you run dev in the background, you can actually press down. And the great thing about doing this way is that you can actually see it running. So it actually says that it comes running. It's actually running on 3001 because 3000 is in use. But the good thing that you have is that now by having it running in the background of that, Claude Code can actually read the logs whenever there are errors as well. So while it's running this curl to ingest it, you can actually take a look at what's going on here. You see, as part of this curl, there's a bunch of requests going out and responses in order to populate the data. So I'll be keen to know if this actually works the first time. So welcome back. Let's just give you a quick update of where we are. I actually ran the ingestion process for a small number of days. And what actually happened is that you can see that it actually grabbed the comments from the different subreddits and stored them in Supabase that you see over here. So you have the raw comments, the raw posts, and then the sentiment results that you see over here from running it against the OpenAI endpoints. And then finally, what it did was that it then ran an ingest poll, which would then aggregate these sentiments for individual days. And you can see it over here. All right, so it's actually aggregated across the 3 different subreddits for 3 different days. And let's just jump right into what the end result looks like. So you can see here, I'm just going to refresh this very quickly. All right, you can actually see the sentiment analysis of Claude across these 3 different subreddits. So when you go to Claude AI and Claude Code, you can see that there are generally positive trends between yesterday and today, right? But then if you go to Anthropic, you can actually see it's actually started to dip lower. So this is generally negative trends. The volume that you can see of 135 over here. So what they did is that they actually stand 135 posts for October 1st, and then for October 2nd, it's only, because we've only just clocked over into October 2nd, so only got 6 posts. All right, so what you can see, generally negative in Anthropic, but for Claude Code and in Claude and Claude AI, it actually is, it has to be a little bit more positive as well. As you can see, I just went from a single PRD going into a design phase, implementation phase, and with this, I was able to actually get to a working application, not only using dummy data, but actually having a proper backend where it stored things within the database. It's able to connect to external APIs like Reddit, ChatGPT, and then perform some AI sentiment analysis on these goals. And even though I've done it only for the past 3 days, you can easily run this for a little bit longer so that you get a larger picture, which I will do. And then I will see if I can actually deploy this application so that you guys can play around with it. But overall, what's my takeaway from Claude? So if you ask me to summarize, I think 4.5 works really well in a lot of cases for me to get to this last mile of integrating it with the backend. Usually it takes a little bit longer in order for it to find its way around. The only thing that I did was to actually do the initial migration using direct SQL. But then after that, everything that it laid out just worked. It's working as a fully integrated backend where we actually do have a sentiment monitor temperature. So if you ask me to summarize, I would say 4.5 is really solid, especially when you pair it with the overall architecture of what Claude Code provides. It can really get you from 0 to 1 really well. And it's not only using mock data, it actually has a fully integrated backend. Now, a couple of things that I've noticed is, first of all, as we saw, the Claude in-editor extension within the IDE still is miles away from Copilot and especially Codex. Like we saw that we weren't actually able to use my custom commands correctly with the arguments. It just like automatically just ran the command. So that's one problem. The other thing that I also noticed is that the overall design of the app, even though we actually use our UI, UX subjects, tends to still be very basic compared to when we actually use Codex, for example. Those designs were very nice. These ones tend to be a lot safer and a lot cleaner, and they tend to look a little bit less impressive. And don't get me wrong, like this is still a clean layout using the right components, but if you compare it to some of the designs that we were doing with Codex, the GPT tends to be a little bit less uniform in how it creates UI. But overall, I think the CLI is still unmatched, just given the ability for you to customize it, the sub-agents, and all the little nice changes. I think overall, I always feel that the Claude Code's terminal UI really looks really good, and I always feel very comfortable when I'm working it, even though I've actually been using Codex a lot more. So overall, I think Sonnet 4.5 is definitely here to stay. I think it's going to pretty much replace day-to-day coding, so I don't think anybody's going to be using 4 anymore. And you probably will still use Opus 4.1 for high reasoning and thinking tasks, but I think for the most part, you're going to be able to get away with 4.5. But overall, pretty solid release. Whether it's actually the groundbreaking leap that some people have initially advertised, I don't really think so. But then again, it's still early days. There's still a lot of fixes going out, and I'm still yet to put it through its paces. But I thought I'd do this for comparison, starting from the same PRD, but this time using Claude Code and using a framework that I've been using for pretty much all the time that I've used Claude Code right now. Right. Hopefully this has been a useful overview of the various changes that have come out as a result of Sonnet 4.5 and Claude Code version 2. I think it's a solid update. I think Anthropic is moving in the right direction. But is it enough to stave off competition from other things like Codex? I'm not very sure. So if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a like, hit that subscribe button, and don't forget to turn on notifications so that you always be the first to know whenever new videos like this drop. And if you want a like-for-like comparison, you will definitely want to see my last video where I actually used Codex and the full ecosystem to build not 1, not 2, but 3 different versions of the Codexometer, which is a very similar app to what we built today, but it looks at the sentiment of Codex across the OpenAI and Codex subreddit. It's a great comparison, not just of workflow, but of results, and you can check it out in this video for sure. All right, till next time, I'll see ya.